The theme of this colloquium is democracy. Is it failing in Africa? I think it's important to recognize the essence. What is the essence of democracy? And to recognize the essence of democracy, I think we should go back to its origin. Democracy, originating from a Greek word, was in fact, in its essence, the transfer of power which occurred in 508 BC, when the Greek statesman Cleisthenes transferred power in the ancient Greek city-state of Athens, which up to that time, up to 508 BC, was ruled by an oligarchic aristocracy. Cleisthenes thought that power should be exercised by the citizens of the society, and so he founded democracy. And since then, we have had all sorts of definitions of democracy, but as we were reminded by President Obasanjo, democracy in its essence was actually defined by Abraham Lincoln, who lived between 1809 and 1865. It was Abraham Lincoln who said that the essence of democracy is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. When the celebrant came to invite me to this colloquium, he asked me to tell the story of my role in promoting democracy in Africa. And so I'd like to tell you that when I was elected Commonwealth Secretary General in 1989, I pledged to the heads of government of the Commonwealth who elected me, that my mission would be threefold. First, to make the Commonwealth a potent force for promoting democracy and human rights. And second, to try, in the words of the great Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, to seek to bring a healing touch to conflicts within and between Commonwealth member countries. And thirdly, to promote technical cooperation among Commonwealth countries for development. At the beginning of my tenure as Secretary General, there were 10 Commonwealth countries that were clearly non-democratic. They were countries that were under either one-party rule or under military rule. And my first attention was to try and persuade those countries that were under one-party rule to become multi-party democracies. So I went, after long conversations with President Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, with President Hastings Banda of Malawi, with President Albert Roni of the Seychelles, and with President Arap Moi of Kenya, I persuaded them to move from one-party state to a multi-party state. And in fact, in the case of Kenya, I sent a foremost Nigerian constitutional lawyer, the late Professor Ben Wabweze, to Kenya to help the Kenya government adapt its constitution from that which served one-party state to a multi-party state constitution. And then I believe that perhaps the most notable of my role was my seminal part in the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa. Briefly here, I would tell you that in November 1991, I went to South Africa and met with the last white president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk. And I told him that I had come to see how the Commonwealth could help him in the conference which he had proposed, a conference between his government and the anti-apartheid political parties in South Africa. And that conference began on December 1, 1991. And I sent to that conference 6 eminent Commonwealth statesmen and women to be at the conference. And when the deliberations of the conference were threatened because of the massacre by apartheid police of 4 ANC stalwarts in a place called Boipatong, the conference was threatened. I flew to South Africa and I had meetings with the President, F.W. de Klerk, with the leader of the ANC, Mandela, with the leader of the PAC, Clarence Makwetu, and with the leader of the Afrikaner Party, General Constant Viljoen. For a while, I could not find Gacha Buthelezi, who was the leader of the IFP. And if I may tell you an amusing story here, when I sent my staff to Ulundi, the capital of KwaZulu-Natal, where Gacha Buthelezi normally lived, and they could not find him, I went to State President F.W. de Klerk, and I said to him, I'm sure that your Secret Service would know the movement of Gacha Buthelezi. Could you tell me where he is? And President F.W. de Klerk said to me, Mr. Secretary General, Buthelezi is in the Holiday Inn in Pretoria under the name of Mr. Rogers. So I dialed the Holiday Inn myself. I didn't ask my secretary or my staff to call the Holiday Inn. I called the Holiday Inn and the switchboard answered, and I said, could you put me through to Mr. Rogers? And they put me through. And of course, I recognized immediately Gacha Buthelezi's voice. But I did say, is that Mr. Rogers? He said, yes. Who is it? And I said, Gacha is your brother chief here. And he shouted and said, how did you know where I am? And I said, in my position, you shouldn't be surprised that I'll be able to find out where you are. And I had a meeting with him because I prepared a one-page accord which I got the president and the leaders of the 4 main parties to sign, an accord to prevent or at least minimize violence in South Africa. And I sent some senior representatives of the Commonwealth to go to South Africa, and their presence helped to douse the violence. And furthermore, I organized a contingent of 26 policemen and women from over the Commonwealth, including Nigeria. The man who ended up as IG in Nigeria, Etim Inyang, was among the 26 policemen and women that I sent to South Africa. And their mission was to help the South Africa police, which had been used only to policing protests of anti-apartheid protesters and fighters, to help to teach them the techniques of community policing, and that they did. And mindful of the time, I'd like to say that I also sent a team of Commonwealth electoral experts to go to help South Africa Electoral Commission in organizing the elections that ushered in democracy in South Africa in 1994. And during the two-year period, almost 2 years, that the conference at Kempton Park lasted, I visited South Africa very many times, and indeed I was present on November 17th at 3:30 a.m. when the conference ended with an agreement on the elections and the installation of a democratic government after the elections. I remember very vividly the quite emotional occasion of Nelson Mandela being sworn in as the president of South Africa. Many in the audience there had tears in their eyes. And another, I must say that I remain grateful to South African government for honoring me doubly for this role. First, by giving me the rare honor of inviting me to address a joint session of South African Parliament in 1995. The highest South African national honor for non-South Africans, the Supreme Companion of OR Tambo Gold. Again, in pursuit of democracy. In 1997, I convened a meeting of all the heads of government, presidents of the 19 African members of the Commonwealth at the time. Of course, that did not include Nigeria, because Nigeria then was under suspension following the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa and his colleagues, despite the desperate personal appeals by Nelson Mandela and myself to General Abacha. And what emerged from their discussions was that one of the biggest challenges faced in African countries in their democracy is the management of diversity. As you know, African countries were lumped together in terms of different ethnic nationalities by the Europeans in their conference in Berlin in 1884, 1885, that paid no regard to the cohesion of the ethnic nationalities. And so the management of diversity is a big challenge to African democracies, including here in Nigeria. Management of diversity is one of our biggest challenges. And as I have said, our founding fathers recognized the significance of management of diversity in agreeing the essentials of our 1960-63 Constitution. I don't believe, as I have said on many occasions, that our current Constitution of 1999 can address that subject. We need a different Constitution from what we have at the moment. And I must say that the country's management of diversity is, of course, a common challenge to democracies all over the world. But those countries that succeeded in remaining individual political entities, notwithstanding their diversity, have been countries that adopted truly federal constitutions. True federalism is the answer to the management of diversity. And true federalism means leaving at the center powers for managing the national issues, but giving the sub-national entities enough power to look after their development and look after their internal security. I believe that the recent military coup d'etats in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger are very worrying signals because they tend to go back, take Africa back to the 1960s, 70s, when the anti-apartheid South African author, Ruth First, in her book, The Barrel of a Gun, said that an American Secretary of State said that he could not remember the number of times when he was woken up at night and told of yet another coup d'etat in an African country whose name sounded like a typographical error. And finally, I'd like to mention another challenge to our democracy in Nigeria, and that is the nature of our politics and the nature of the conduct of our politicians. Our political parties are not, as they should be, ideologically based. They are, on the whole, instruments for capturing political power. And that's a challenge to our democracy. And if I may conclude with one statement, I would say that it's only through stable democratic governance which would facilitate indigenous creativity and manufacturing that will, both in Nigeria and in African countries, be able to rid our continent of internal conflicts and lack of substantial socioeconomic development. Because these are the two factors that impede Africa's ability to change what is generally a Eurocentric narrative of Africa and the black people. A narrative that is the basis of racism and the looking down on Africans by other races. I believe that Nigeria, with its known attributes, has a special responsibility in changing this Eurocentric narrative. And I go on to remember a story told in 1971 at a Commonwealth meeting by late Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew said that in the 40s, cheap and inefficient gadgets were generally described as China or Japan. But since the 1940s, because China and Japan embraced development, industrial development, that description of inefficient gadgets stopped. And so we in Africa, and particularly we in Nigeria, have the responsibility of having a stable democracy which would enable our people to create and to manufacture. And by that, we would help to change the Eurocentric narrative of Africa and the black people. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please, another round of applause for you.